Hello everybody and welcome to TJ's Lego Room, and today I am excited to finally get back into the swing of building mocks and showing them to you guys. So, first things first, this was not my idea. One of the subscribers here on TJ's Lego Room named Cade actually contacted me and asked me to help him build a mock based on a combination of 5 different ships from Star Wars. I had done a couple of combinations of it, like 2 or sometimes even 3 different ships before, but this was a real challenge to try to do 5 different ships. It was such a challenge that it actually took almost 6 months for me to do. So, what ships did you want to do? First off, he wanted to combine an X-Wing, a speeder bike, or more precisely the front vanes of the X-Wing jump speeder that I did a while back. So the X-Wing, my jump speeder front vanes, the Yoda starfighter winglets, the arrowheads engines from the freemaker adventures, if you're familiar with that, and have it all done in the color scheme of Jek 14's starfighter. So mostly black with some red accents. Thankfully, he actually sent a collaged look of what he wanted the ship to look like, and so of course, here you go. At first, I really struggled with this ship. So many of my ships lately have actually been for mass production, so TIE fighters, speeder bikes, walkers, all meant to be built by huge militaries with efficiency in mind. And because of that, I couldn't find a great role for this fighter to fit into. I didn't really know what its purpose was. But that didn't stop me from drawing. I actually started doodling in my book pretty quickly and came up with the basic shape. I really just went for a literal interpretation of what he had shown me, basically drawing my own version of the picture, sticking all the different components on there without trying to reconcile attachment points or logical purposes behind why they are where they are. But it didn't take long for a second draft to follow. I eliminated the larger wings that didn't quite look right for me and went for a more streamlined and aggressive look. But then, after months of keeping this in the back of my mind, it suddenly hit me. This is a modified ship. It's a custom built ship, and as such, it can have exposed engine parts like a Y-Wing. But even more than that, I think I could do the entire front section of the X-Wing nose portion stripped down into a coverless assembly, and so began the build. After checking with Cade really quick about the exposed machinery aspect, I started working on the actual build. The front of it came together rather quickly, but it went through a few rounds of refinement later on. I did finish the cockpit section pretty quick and figured out where the droid would go, and eventually built some new engines and used some new techniques that I hadn't seen before or that I hadn't experienced or built before. And everything was going pretty well until I got to the wings. For some reason, I couldn't physically build the wings. I kept trying to figure out mechanisms to open and close the wings, ways to build it out of plates or snotting, you name it, I thought about it. I ended up stuck at this phase for over 2 months. The partially finished ship just sat staring at me, taunting me, daring me to finish, and laughing at my inability to tap into my creativity. But luckily, after those 2 difficult months were finally over, it suddenly happened. I sat down and built until 3 a.m. solid in an unbroken frenzy, and I finished the ship. Looking back, the solutions were pretty obvious, and I'd even considered them before. I'm not sure why I was averse to it originally, but we got it done, and ladies and gentlemen, I give you the heavily modified Z-105 strike fighter, known as the Mynock 1. Oh, it finally got done, and I gotta say, I think it actually looks pretty good. The red and black color scheme that Kate offered me was pretty awesome. It was a great idea to use the Jek 14 idea. I must admit, I was really happy with how it ended up turning out. Plus, because of all my final order builds and TIE fighters, I ended up with quite a few red and black pieces, so that actually worked out pretty well for me. So if you want to stick around for a minute, I actually will go into deeper detail on the ship, and I have a little bit of background for the ship and its pilot. The name has been changed slightly to protect the guy who I collaborated with on this. So, pilot Cade Orem, last name has been changed, was made the leader of Mynock Squadron during the Rebellion era of Star Wars, sometime between the first and second Death Star. Records were a little spotty during that time, so that's maybe why you haven't heard of Mynock Squadron or Cade Orem, the legendary leader of that squadron. Mynock Squadron was made up of 6 modified Z-95 and Z-105 starfighters. These modifications tended to cause issues with the wiring and power couplings on the ships, requiring maintenance to crews to always keep a few replacement parts on hand for after their missions. Due to this tendency to wear out the power couplings and wires, the squad was nicknamed the Mynocks by the rebel mechanics, and eventually the name kind of stuck. Cade Orham's ship, the Mynock 1, was a heavily modified Z-105 starfighter. So the Z-105 was an advanced model of the Z-95 and was most easily recognized by its reversion to the Clone Wars era design of 2 large engines instead of the usual 4, similar to the X-Wing's quad engine configuration. That's normally what you saw during the Rebellion, but Clone Wars had those has the 2 engine configuration, which I liked a little bit better, and it matched more his original collage picture that he sent me anyway. Now we're going to go ahead and zoom in and go over a few of the modification details here real quick. Let's see. Sweet. Perfect. All right, so starting at the front, we have the vanes. On top of stripping the panels off of that section, 2 heavy speeder deflector vanes were added to the front of the ship to help with really close maneuvers around obstacles like asteroids, ships, barriers. In addition, a couple of light ion cannons were actually added to the front as well, and that just helps the ship get through shields if they were becoming bothersome. So the panels I removed off of the front. Now, panels are actually kind of a fun topic to discuss in Star Wars. There are actually several reasons why a pilot or a maintenance worker would leave panels off, like in the Y-Wings, they left a lot of the panels off. But in this case, it actually served 2 different purposes. The first was weight. Most panels, while relatively light compared to what we have in the real world, even though they're pretty light that way, comparatively, they are still dead weight. So Mynock Squadron, being a traditional hit-and-run rebel group, speed was definitely of the essence. In addition, the lack of those panels blocking the sensor equipment and communications equipment at the front helped lower their energy consumption. And or if you wanted, you could keep the energy consumption and increase the range depending on how you wanted to tune those sensors and communication equipment for a particular mission. The main body was pretty simple with very few surprises. It looks very much like a traditional X-Wing cockpit, or it looks very familiar. It's a very rebel cockpit area. So if we go back a little bit further, we start to get some of the more distinct differences here. It does have the regular cockpit. Unfortunately, I did not put together a minifigure for our friend Cade, but we went ahead and put him in the seat here. We'll put a Poe Dameron in there. He's a good pilot. He'll take good care of your ship, I'm pretty sure. He's no Anakin Skywalker. He's not going to crash it immediately, right? Now, additional deflector vanes on the wingtips did assist with a very similar purpose to the forward deflector vanes, allowing the pilot to have greater margins of error when performing close flyby maneuvers. As a somewhat intentional byproduct, the magnetic fields generated by these vanes also help to direct and focus the laser cannons that are on the wingtips here. That allowed for slightly more precise targeting when in combat situations. And speaking of targeting, actually, this little protrusion from the top here is actually an advanced targeting sensor, this little upside down ice skate here. I imagine it was a targeting sensor, which is basically like kind of an aftermarket GPS, but instead of tracking you, it tracks your enemies around you. And now for the biggest adjustment to the ship, the engines. So while the Z95s had to be retrofitted for hyperdrives, the Z105 did come with a standard Class 2 hyperdrive. But of course, Cade Orham didn't want to be left behind, so he tuned and modified the drive until he could keep up with pretty much any Class 1, and sometimes even beat them, trying to go through hyperspace. But the really unique part of Mynock 1 is this giant booster engine that's mounted in the middle with all those exposed engine parts there. This was an on-demand engine that could be shut off whenever he wanted. You can use it for extra speed and to get some really awesome maneuverability, or you could shut it off to conserve fuel if you're just puttering around or just traveling from one place to another. Many of the mechanics on his team told Cade that there was no way to put that big of an engine on this little ship, but in the end, it totally worked. And actually, not long after, they couldn't keep any extra engines in stock, any spare engines, because every pilot in the Rebel fleet wanted to know how they could get such a awesome boost in speed by adding an extra engine on the back of their crafts. Eventually, they did shut down those kind of modifications, so we don't see a lot of ships later on having those really awesome extras. Now, of course, the last modification on the ship is the landing gear. So let me go ahead and show you. It doesn't have any. There is no landing gear, although there is the little scoop on the bottom for the middle engine. So you got these scoops on the side and one on the bottom for fun. So why doesn't it have landing gear? And I promise it's not just because I'm not very good at landing gear. In the Star Wars universe, apparently it's very easy to get a vehicle of any kind to hover using repulsor lift technology. This technology not only creates a frictionless connection to the ground, but also is apparently crazy efficient. It allows land speeders and speeder bikes to just sit wherever they are parked for an insane amount of time without using up fuel or killing the battery. And I have experience with that. You leave the light on in your car overnight and suddenly your battery's dead the next morning. No, not in Star Wars. Repulsor lifts, holding an entire vehicle off the ground takes less energy than leaving a light on in your car. Crazy, right? Star Wars. Magic, science, and technology. So even though that's not fair necessarily for us in our day, Mynock 1 had no landing gear and relied just on repulsors to keep it afloat, ready to go at a moment's notice. So, I know it's not that big of a difference, but if you went and jumped in your ship and took off and accidentally left your landing gear down, it could cause some problems, right? Just ask any pilot. Landing gear is not aerodynamic at all. Not, of course, the aerodynamics is a big deal in Star Wars, but neither here nor there. That one extra step that in Star Wars they have to go through to pull their landing gear up into the ship, not necessarily on Mynock 1. It's pretty awesome. Just for emergency's sake, though, the hull was designed so that if the repulsor lifts did fail, it can rest gently on the ground without damaging the internal ship's components. So, thinking a little bit ahead. And now we'll go over a couple of the weapons real quick. We'll go over all the weapons. Why don't we? So we have the two nose-mounted ion disruptors, the two medium laser cannons on the sides. We do have two proton torpedo launchers on either side, just like the X-Wings. And while it does seem like it's a kind of light amount of armament for a starfighter, it actually did have a pretty cool, it did have a pretty neat cooling system that allowed a seemingly continuous flow of laser bolts without overheating the cannons. That made it a really good spray and pray type ship, but in the hands of an ace pilot, it becomes a deadly and precise craft that is definitely meant to be feared. If you've ever played Battlefront 2, if you get the A-Wing and upgrade its rate of fire and cooling systems, you can get right behind another enemy and just blast them and destroy them before your weapons overheat. And that's kind of what I was going for with the ship as well. So, and that's it, guys. That's it. That's the entire everything I wanted to talk about for the ship. Thank you so much for sticking around at TJ's Lego Room. If you wanted to get the instructions for this, I have great news. They will come out eventually. I actually have built this ship completely digitally in Stud.io, and the instructions are just sitting and waiting for me to jump in and go through them and make sure they're good to go. But as I've said before, I am waiting for my all-terrain tactical command center to be complete because I want that to be my 30th mock to get me that cool Jedi Master badge that really doesn't mean anything, but it's a goal that I've had to get. So the instructions should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. I'll make sure to post it everywhere I can to let everybody know that that's ready to go when the time comes. But until then, And until I see you next time in TJ's Lego Room, play well. Bye.